Welcome to the first episode of Italian Fashion from A to Z. Instead of following an alphabetical order, I'll go totally random, so I pick as the first letter the letter W. W as in the 5 W's of Italian fashion. In other words, when and where did Italian fashion start? Who is considered the father of Italian fashion and why? And finally, which outfits made Italy famous for? Italian fashion was born in Florence in 1952. Quite late if you consider that the French fashion dates back to the 17th century. The reason is quite simple. Italy has always been a fragmented nation that was unified only in the 1861. And this weak nationalism has always been an obstacle to establishing a single vision of fashion. In fact, before 1950s, dressing à la Parisienne was de rigueur for stylish women throughout Italy. Right after the Second World War, the situation drastically changed. The turning point came in the form of a fashion event that was masterminded by a Tuscan aristocrat and businessman named Giovan Battista Giorgini. Giorgini's idea was simple yet very effective. He wanted to establish Italian fashion as totally independent from any French influence and focusing on our artistic heritage and local great craftsmanship. And in doing so, he convinced some couturiers from Milan and Rome, plus few designers of a new creative category called boutique, to join him in Florence. In February 1951, at Villa Torrigiani, Giorgini private residence in Florence, the first fashion marathon started. However, the official birth of Italian fashion is considered July 1952, a year later. At that time, Giorgini was granted the use of the opulent Palazzo Pitti's Sala Bianca, which will host for many years and way before Milan, the Italian fashion shows. Giorgini's idea of being modern at the same time looking back to our heritage and our traditions was perfectly executed by a group of designers of a new sector called boutique, which could be considered an early version of today's ready-to-wear. The most famous designer of this group was the Marquis Emilio Pucci. Although he was well known for his colorful psychedelic prints, in his early years, Pucci made figurative tributes to the beauty of Italy, from the motifs of the Sicilians' horse-drawn carts to the iconic shape of the baptistry of St. John's in Florence, to the traditional costumes of Palio of Siena. The island of Capri was another source of inspiration for Pucci's vibrant palette, and that he also famously appropriated the local fishermen's narrow crop pants, internationally known as Capri pants. Another dynamo was Simonetta Visconti di Cesarò, a Roman noblewoman who, like Pucci, became very famous in the US thanks to her great, sophisticated, and yet informal taste. And speaking of Rome, Rome boasted a glitzy, cosmopolitan crowd and a bustling Via Veneto nightlife. Hollywood's big film productions in Cinecittà studios offer cheaper rates than California, and the glitzy season of so-called Hollywood on the Tiber started indeed in Rome in the 50s, with blockbusters movies such as Roman Holidays and The War and Peace. The ateliers became a destination for American stars. For instance, Sorelle Fontana's three sisters who own a maison de couture in Rome had their reputation take off thanks to the wedding dress they designed for Lindia Christian when she married the American star Tyrone Power in 1949. However, the celebrities who really consolidated their fame was Ava Gardner, whom they provided off-screen wardrobe as well as costumes for movies such as The Barefoot Contessa, The Sun Also Rises, and On the Beach. The film director Michelangelo Antonioni, renowned for his interest in fashion, chose Sorelle Fontana as the costume designers of his movie Le Amiche. Another couturier quite famous for a Hollywood connection was Fernanda Gattinoni. Her understated aesthetic attracted, for instance, Ingrid Bergman, who wore her clothes in real life and in 3 Roberto Rossellini's films: Stromboli, Europe 51, and Journey to Italy. Gattinoni's Hollywood work included costumes for Lana Turner in Douglas Sirk's Imitation of Life and for Audrey Hepburn in King Vidor's War and Peace, for which she won an Oscar nomination. Italian stars Sofia Loren and Giuliano Lollobrigida loved the exuberant, larger-than-life Neapolitan couturier Emilio Schubert, while actress Esther Williams chose Roberto Capucci, who designed for her the famous 9 dresses gown, so-called in Italian Nove Gonne. Also in Rome, Irene Galitzin's relaxed chic style conquered the powerful editor of American Vogue, Diana Vreeland. She renamed pajamas palazzos the simple pants and tops encrusted with sequins, crystal, and pearls, launching them as the ultimate must-have. In the early 60s, a young man from Voghera, who learned the métier in Paris, came to Rome and became its emperor. And we'll talk about Valentino. Valentino, who will be the subject of one of our future episodes, became the couturier of the jet set and reached the acme of his popularity in 1968, thanks to the wedding dress worn by Jackie Kennedy at her wedding with Aristotele Onassis. Around the mid-60s, a fashion revolution started. A radical new development was that the textile producer provided financial aids to clothing manufacturers, who hired freelance designers called stilisti to create collections that were neither couture nor mass market, and eventually became known as ready-to-wear. The father of them all was Walter Albini, who worked for many labels, including Grazia, Mr. Fox, and Billy Ballo, before going solo in 1974. The allure of the 20s and 30s fashion styles mixed with North African exoticism informed his aesthetic, and his shows, very ahead of the time, were real happenings. In 1971, Albini convinced a small yet powerful group of designers, Ken Scott, Jean-Baptiste Caumont, Grazia, and the Misonis, to abandon Florence and the Pitti Sala Bianca for Milan. The choice of Milan was not a capricious coup d'etat, but coincided with a far more complex operation. The awareness that fashion needed room for a new relationship between design and production. In other words, the stilista doesn't work anymore in an old palazzo. Now he goes to the factory. Milan was not only close to the textile industries, but also to the machine and tool factories. Plus, having always been an industrial city, it offered infrastructure, a wide transport system, and a functional exhibition space, such as Fiera Campionaria. In Milan, you could also find the first PR, such as Beppe Modenese, the Prime Minister of Italian and Milanese fashion, as well as the advertising agencies and the distribution offices. Last but not least, the fashion magazines, which since the beginning of the 20th century were indeed published in Milan. And in 1960s, 2 new big publications were born, Vogue Italia and Linea Italiana. All based in Milan were Albini contemporaries, Armani, Versace, and Ferré, who also initially collaborated with ready-to-wear companies before striking out on their own. Thanks for listening, and keep in mind what the legendary costume designer Edith Head said. Fashion is a language. Some know it, some learn it like an instinct. Goodbye.